The Victorian Premier has scheduled a meeting with the party secretary of the Communist Party of China as his office provides a bureaucratic and diplomatic update on his first day in China. Our Victoria political reporter Simon Love has the latest. And Simon, the backdrop to all of this is the fact that no media have accompanied him and been invited to report on a significant visit to China by the Victorian Premier.
It certainly is, Kieran, and I've spoken with Peter Jennings in the last hour and a half and actually discussed with him what the latest information that we're getting out of the Victorian Premier's office. Peter Jennings, of course, former head of the Strategic Policy Institute in Canberra, very well respected foreign policy analyst and observer. And he says to me that this is a major issue, that Daniel Andrews could be essentially opening himself up to further scrutiny by not taking the media on his trip. But what we do know about his arrangements and also meetings on day 2 of his trip being Wednesday, we know that he's meeting with the party secretary of the Communist Party of China's Jiangsu Provincial Committee. He's then meeting with the governor of Jiangsu. So this comes after a train trip from Beijing to Nanjing. And we know that there's also a readout from the Victorian Premier's office, particularly around his meeting with an association previously condemned by the US government, which included a discussion on sister state relations and provinces where Victoria should focus future effort. Now, Peter Jennings tells me out of that quote and observation that the discussion of sister state and state relations and province relations, it's a bit of a fallback or a bit of a hark back to that Belt and Road Agreement that was torn up by the federal government, signed by the Victorian Premier in 2018-2019. So it's interesting to see that now we're seeing Daniel Andrews try and repair some of those relations. We've got a readout too from the meeting that Daniel Andrews held with the Education Minister as well. There's been a readout from the Chinese side of things as well. Interesting to compare and contrast some of the language there, particularly around cooperation, particularly around Victoria being a safe place for international students to come to, and China reportedly, according to the Premier's office, saying that Chinese people would prefer to send students to Victoria rather than any other place. There was also a meeting with the Mayor of Beijing in regards to the State Electricity Commission plans that the Premier has got, Kieran. And I found it really interesting listening to your guest in the last hour, the former ambassador to China, who spoke about this trip, the significance of this trip. He did note, as you well heard, that media may not have been on every trip that Daniel Andrews has taken to China in the past. In fact, the Premier's office has been trying to stress that point to media outlets. They haven't taken media every time. But it's really the significance of going on this trip right now, this point in time where AUKUS, the submarine deal, has just been signed. We've come out of the pandemic, and it certainly warrants a lot of scrutiny and transparency, Kieran.
It absolutely does. You're right about that. It's a very different kettle of fish, isn't it, Simon? Thank you for that. I look forward to chatting to you tomorrow as we try and cover it, albeit from afar, that visit to China by the Victorian Premier.